Let's talk about object-oriented programming and how to implement it in PHP. Now, before we get into the implementation of object-oriented programming, I believe it's essential to understand it at a high-level overview. Object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm, or essentially a style of which code is written. And this style centers around the object. So the object is essentially a collection of information and logic or functionality. This information is stored within properties, which are also known as attributes or fields in other programming languages, and methods, which is where the logic or functionality is stored. And to actually understand how an object is created and basically how it works, I have this diagram up. Essentially, what we start off with is something called a class. Now, a class is different from an object, but essentially, what it does is it provides the blueprint of which an object is created. It's where you actually define the properties and the different methods which you're going to use to actually build that object. Because if you think about it, an object needs some predefined properties and logic to actually work, right? Because that's the whole point of an object. It stores some sort of predefined logic and predefined data, right? But you can't just get that magically. You need some medium, a place where you can actually define this. And that place is a class. Okay. So as you can see here, this class has different properties and different methods. All right. And you can think about these properties and methods as variables or functions as well, just to kind of draw a little bit of a comparison. But obviously, these properties and methods, they're constrained within the context of OOP. All right. But essentially, this class is where you would define these properties and these methods. You would work on the logic and all within there. Then what you would do is within your programming language of choice, in my case PHP, you would create an instance of this class, right? And you would do that usually through the new keyword. And once you create an instance of this class, right? You create an instance of this class, then you make an object, right? And then this object, where there's an instance of this class, it can have some defined values, right? You can within your code, you can actually define some values within it, and so that's what we do here, right? So these properties now they have values which are defined by the developer when they create that object. So you can do that when you actually create that object, when you build it from that class. So essentially, what I'm trying to get at is to actually make an object, you need to have a class first. Then that class will lay the groundwork, the very foundations of which that object ought to be built. All right. So now that we understand a little bit more about object-oriented programming and specifically objects, which is the star, the centerpiece of this programming paradigm, let's actually try to implement it in code. And we're going to do that through, as I said before, PHP. Now, within my file structure, all you need to worry about is the OOP file, which stands for Object Oriented Programming. And in that, I have two folders. I have the includes folder, and this includes like different logic, which uses the objects, right, of different different places where I built these objects. You don't need to worry about this too much. This was just some code that I just built through a tutorial, right? What you need to worry about is the classes folder. This is where our classes live, the blueprints for our objects. Now within here, I have a lot of classes. Currently, all you need to care about is the persons.php, which I still have yet to build, and this is where we're going to build our classes. Now, to actually make an object out of that class, we're going to do that in the person.php file, which is not capitalized. And this is kind of the standard naming convention. When you have a class, you would capitalize the first letter of your file name. And when you have a file of which you use that class to build an object, you'd keep it lowercase. All right. All right. So let's get started by building out our class. To start off, we need to actually define something called a namespace. All right, so a namespace is essentially a reference. It's a way for PHP to know that you're actually building a class, right? And so this way, when you go into the lowercase person.php file, you will be able to use this namespace so that PHP recognizes um, your actual class, right? Okay, so now that we have that namespace, let's actually start by building our class. To do that, we need to use the class keyword. So the class like so, and then person like that. Okay. You can name it whatever you want. In my case, I'm building a person dummy class, so we're gonna go with that. Now within here, we need to define a couple um, of different properties. All right. So to actually define these properties or methods, even in that case, you need to understand visibility. So when you actually are designing your class, you have the option of setting your visibility for your different methods and your properties to either public, protected, or private. Public means that literally anyone can use it. So your object, of which this class is an instance, right? It can use it, right? That method or that property, right? No worries about it. Basically, any place where this class is mentioned can use that specific property. So that's public. Now, protected means that only children, the classes, and the class itself can use it, right? Can use that method or that property. And finally, private means that your specific functionality or method or your specific data or property can only be accessed by the class itself. Okay, so only the class can access it. When you build an object based off of this class, well, that property cannot be accessed by the object itself. It can only be accessed by the internals of this class. So it is a very good idea to actually start off by using the private visibility, right? So you always default to private visibility because that gives you the most control over your program, right? The most predictability because all of those datas can only be accessed or informations or logics. They can only be accessed by the class itself, not by any sort of instance of that class or object, right? So you always start off with that. But then, as you're working through your program and you see a very, very severe need to make it public or protected, basically loosen the restriction on that visibility, then you can do it. Then you can switch over to that visibility. But always start off with private. Oftentimes developers would start off with public and then go the kind of like the opposite of what just said, but it's not a very good practice to do that because then you're loosening that rigidity that this kind of provides, right? So anyways, let's go ahead and start by defining some properties. I'm going to start off by defining a name, and cursor is kind of helping me out here, but I'm probably just gonna go through this step by step because I want you to understand the syntax. AI will only get you so far. You need to understand what's happening to actually build scalable and clean software systems. Okay, anyways, I'm gonna do age. Let's do email too. Or actually, let's do gender. There we go. So these are the different data types that I am referencing. All right, and remember they're only accessible, but in the class right now because of the uh, of the of the visibility that I used. Okay. All right. Now what we're gonna do is I'm going to actually call on a method. I'm gonna build a method, and this method is called a constructor. Okay, so let's do that. And so this I'm gonna try to disable this. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I just disabled Copilot so that it kind of just lets me do my own thing. Okay. So, anyways, in this function, all right, basically happening is that this function will run as soon as you build a new object. All right. So as soon as you call on this class and make an instance of it, this function will run. And so this provides us with the unique opportunity to actually set these properties to some sort of value, because right now they're nothing, right? They don't have a value. I just define them so I can use it later within my program. All right. So within here, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to define some parameters which are going to be passed down from the class itself when the class first is made into an instance, right? Made into an object, right? Which will happen within this file over here in a bit. But remember, basically the constructor function runs as soon as a new object is built. So in this case, I'm going to call name, age, and gender. Now, a very important distinction has to be made here. These parameters are completely different from these properties over here. Okay, they're two different things. I should put only one hand up. Two different things. All right. To actually reference these variables, you need to actually use the this keyword. So it'd be like this, and then you would put arrows. Arrows is how you access different properties and methods within an object. And that kind of leads to my next point. The this keyword actually references the current object of which this class is associated to. All right. So essentially, we use this, which is referencing the object of which this class is being built upon. And then you put the arrows to actually get a property or method. In my case, I want to get the name property, which would reference this, right? Because that's what we have defined within the object, which this class is currently associated to. So then that's going to be like that, and it's going to be equal to the name parameter. So remember, this is completely different. This name parameter or variable is completely different from this property. All right. So let's do the same thing again. Like so. All right. Cool. So now what will happen is as soon as you make a new object and you add some data into it, that data will be passed through, and then it would be set into these specific properties. Now what we will do is, first of all, I need to fix that typo. What we will do is we'll make getter and setter methods. Okay. So again, we're going to call public because we want this to be accessed by the object itself, right? And we're going to call get name. And what this is going to do is it's going to return the name attribute. Okay, so essentially, getter and setter functions basically get or change the property values. Now, you could just make these public, like you make these properties public, and then you could manipulate them through the object itself, like directly through the object. But it's a better practice to actually have getter and setter methods because it provides you more flexibility. You can add your own custom logic for when you should have a variable set to a specific, value. You can also clean, sanitize the data. Basically, it allows for standardized way of setting or getting these properties. All right. In my case, I'm not going to do all of that because that's just going to be added complexity to an already complex topic that I'm talking about. So for now, it's just going to be simple get and set functions. But just know that with these getter and setter methods, you have that ability to add your own custom logic on top of setting these variables, or sorry, setting these properties. So I'm going to keep doing the same thing for get age. And we're using camel case because that's that's the standard way of writing code. So we're gonna get gender now. Oops. There we go. Okay. So that is how these are all the getter methods. So I'm actually gonna change this by commenting getter methods, and these are all the getter methods. And then now I'm gonna say setter methods, and these are all the setter methods. So public function set name, and so this is gonna basically get a parameter, and then it's basically gonna do the same thing as I did over here, right? So I'm just gonna copy that and paste it for added efficiency. And right now I'm just gonna have AI do this. Apparently it did not shut down when uh, I told it not to. I think I need to refresh my window. But anyways, that's fine. Um, there we go. So these are the setter methods. These are the getter methods. But actually, within the setter methods, you know what? Let me add a little bit of custom logic to it, just to show you the power of setting your class in this way, where your properties are private, and then you have your getter and setter methods. Within my setter methods, I'm actually going to go to set gender, and I'm going to see if gender equals, and I'm going to say male, or gender equals female. Okay, and I'm actually going to make this into sex, just to be a little bit more inclusive there. Right, get sex. So set sex, there we go, because this is biologically I'm talking about. And let me just fix all this. There we go. Okay, anyways, what I can do now is basically add this over here. So essentially we're checking if the sex is male or female, then only update it. Otherwise, I'm just going to say return null. And in this case, actually return false. And in this case, I'm going to return true. There we go. So you can see that now I have this custom logic where I'm basically checking and making sure that, this is set right properly, like the parameter is set properly before I actually allow it to be updated. Now you can obviously do this in the program itself, right? Like when you have an object already, but it's better to do it in the class itself because now it's standardized. Whenever you make an object, right, with this class, this logic will already be there for you to use. So you're adhering to the dry principle. Do not repeat yourself. You don't need to keep repeating the same logic in every single object or instance of this class, right? So it just helps that bit more. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what I can do is I can bring this down here, right? And I can just call on these setter functions. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say set age, and I'm going to pass in age, like so. Or sorry, this should be set name and name. And we can do the same thing here. So set age to age. Oops. Right? And set sex to sex. Like so. There we go. So that way we kind of streamlined the setting logic to these functions here. Remember, even if it's a public function, you can still use it within the class. That's kind of a given there. But yeah, that should help a bit. There we go. Okay. One thing that I actually want to do is, first of all, I want to take these getter methods. I'm going to just bring them down. The only reason why I have the setter methods above the constructor is so that they're actually like they're there, right? Um, so yeah. Um, okay. So now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add another method. And this method is just going to be something very simple. It's just going to be validate, I should say handle validate adult. And essentially this function, which should be public, let me do that, is going to be checking to see if the user is an adult. So to do that, we need to first access the property of age, and we want to see if it's greater than or equal to 18. And if it is, then we're going to return true. And I'm actually going to make this into a one-liner like that because there's no added logic, so we don't need the curly brackets. And otherwise, it's going to be false, like so. There we go. So that's our class there. Now let's actually try to build an object from this class. So to do that, as I said, we're going to go into the lowercase person.php file. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually require this file. So we're going to say require once. And then we're going to say class dash person.php, like so. And if you look here, it will bring you to the OOP class method, the class file folder, excuse me, and there it is, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to call the use directive. The use directive is how we actually call on this namespace so that we can actually access that class. So it's going to be OOP dash classes dash person, like that. Okay, there we go. Now what we can do is we can actually build an object. So I'm going to say person, or I'll say, yeah, person one. Okay, so that's an object. And the way it's going to be an object is by calling the new keyword like so, and then person. So you see now how it's kind of working. You have this person one variable which holds the object of person one, and that is essentially calling the class of person to actually lay the groundwork, the blueprint for this object, right? So like what properties and what methods it needs. So now within here, let's say the name is Hemant Patel. I'm going to build a person for myself. The age is going to be 16, and the sex is going to be male, like so. And let's do the same thing, but in this case, I'm going to make one for Jeff Bezos. All right. I am not sure what his age is. Let's actually see. He is 61 years old. Okay. So let's add 61, and he's a male. And let's make one more for Mark Zuckerberg. So I'm going to say Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not sure how old he is. He's 41. And let's say he's a male. There we go. So there are your three objects, right? These are all objects independent of each other. Okay, they might share the same class, but they're independent of each other. All right, they are not related except for having the same class. Now within here, what I can do is I can actually use the arrow directives, as I said before, to access the different methods and properties. In this case, in these three objects, I won't be able to access any properties because all the properties available are private, right? But I can access the different methods. In my case, I want to access the handle validate adult method. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to say echo person one handle validate adult, and we're going to do the same thing for all three persons. Okay, now if I actually go into the server here and I um, refresh, it's saying class person is not a real thing. And that's because I actually misspelled this. It's supposed to be classes, like so. And there we go. Now, a one in PHP basically means true. So essentially here, it's giving me two trues for these two people, right? Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and for myself, I'm not an adult yet, so it's not giving me anything, right? It doesn't output anything, and that just means it's false. All right. So we can actually make this a little bit better by saying person one, and then let's say we get name, and then I'm gonna add a empty line like so. Then we're gonna do that. All right, so let's do the same thing here. So person two in this case, we're gonna get their name, and we're gonna add those braces. Sorry, not braces, empty line. Let's do the same thing here. Get name, and there we go. So now, and actually at the end, I want to add a break tag because in this case, PHP is going to be sending just HTML back. So you can use these tags. So there you go. As you can see, in my case, it doesn't give me anything back because it's actually rendering zero, but zero doesn't actually show on the screen, but it's working as intended. Actually, to make this a little bit more user friendly, instead of returning true and false Boolean values, let's return adult, let's return pass and fail. So now if I refresh this, and actually what I should do here is I'm just going to add this into string like that, and then else like that. Oh, sorry. I can keep it like that. I actually had to return this. Okay. I was wondering if there was a problem. So actually, I forgot to add the return statement. So now it'll give me fail. So if I kept it as true and false, it should actually render that zero. Sometimes it doesn't, but you know. Oh, actually, it shouldn't. That's my bad. Okay, but anyways, so this is gonna return, let's say, um, pass like before, and let's just say this returns fail. It's just a little bit better. So there you go. So that's the basics of object-oriented programming. That's my bad. I had a little mishap there, but we all do. But yeah, that is how you can create your own class and then build objects from that, as I did here. Okay. Now, as I said before, there are child classes, right? If you remembered with the protected visibility. So how does that sort of work? To show that, instead of having this, I have built um, some code for it. Okay, specifically the DBH class, which is our database handler class. It handles the connection logic for our database, and then our sign up, which is basically where I have extended to our database handler class. And to really show that, um, here's how it kind of works. All right. So essentially, this is our parent class. This contains our the information, right, or the functionality which needs to be used in other classes. In our case, it's just simply connecting to our database. Now, within our signup, we basically call a class signup, and then we use the extends keyword to basically allow whatever logic we have here to be used within this class itself. All right, and the way we can do that is you can do it through this syntax, right? But the problem with this is that if you have a function in this class which has the same name, that function will take precedence from the parent class. So a more better suited way of doing it is like this. like that. All right. And that's how I did it here, as you can see. All right. So essentially, by using the extends keyword, you're basically taking this logic and you're saying to the PHP program that, hey, I can use this logic in this class as well. All right. And the protected visibility will allow me to use it here. If I made this private, then it won't let me use it here at all. You can see I get an error automatically, right? But protected will. And it'll also ensure that it cannot be used within an object context. All right, so it's only allowed to be used within classes. All right, so that's object-oriented programming delved in a bit more deeply.